He may be the single most influential Richmonder of the last decade. In 2016, Levar Stoney was elected mayor, the youngest in the River City's history. Over the next 8 years, he served 2 terms, leading Richmond through a pandemic and protests and taking big swings on economic projects with mixed results. Now he's running for higher office against a crowded field. Today, we leave no stone unturned during a fascinating conversation with a politician you may have thought you knew everything about. Welcome back to Untold. Today, we have a guest that everybody is going to know. Former Richmond Mayor Levar Stoney is joining us. He is now a candidate in the primary season for Lieutenant Governor on the Democratic side. Levar, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Catie. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. I know that you're super busy. I can tell from your Facebook page.
A little bit.
Every time I look, there's like, you're here, you're there, you're everywhere.
I try to put my pillow down, my head down on the pillow in Richmond most nights, but it can be a little difficult when you're traveling the Commonwealth. It's a big state.
Yeah. So give me sort of like a day in the life of right now. I mean, where are you? Are you everywhere on all corners? Are you focused on an area?
No, I'm in all corners for the most part. You know, I live on 95 and 64. I've spent my time in traffic in 95 around Woodbridge and Lorton, you name it. I spent a lot of weekends in Fairfax County, one of the biggest locality in all of Virginia. My day normally begins with me waking up here in Richmond, in Churchill, spending some time with my little girl Sunday in the morning, because there's a good possibility by the time that I get home, she'll already be in bed. And so I try to spend my first part of the day, couple hours, then roll into the office, make a ton of phone calls. That's most of the weekdays I do a lot of that. And on some weekdays, I'll start off by, I think yesterday, I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, left at 7:30, arrived in Alexandria at 9:30 for meetings, and I was in the District of Columbia, then came back into the state for more meetings and more events, and I spent all day there and then come back and it's 10:30, 11 o'clock. And so.
And you start all over again.
You start all over again.
Yeah. I mean, the fundraising seems to be going well for you. I saw that, you were the front runner this go around on that in your category.
We are putting a lot of work in there. What people sometimes don't understand is that I think these campaigns are about, obviously, people. You need people to vote for you, right? But also you need to be able to reach these individuals. And, there's so many distractions these days, from your smartphone to what's going on in your daily life. Yeah. You have to find ways to break through all that, and that's where the fundraising is necessary.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Do you think people are paying attention? I sort of sense that there is a little election fatigue still lingering from November, and I wonder if it's been challenging for you to be like, hey guys, there's a primary coming up in June. Because some people, I bet you could bump into someone on the street and they would have no idea.
Well, there's an election in Virginia every year, and I can understand the fatigue sometimes, right? Because there's an election every year. And us politicians, we normally say to folks that this is the most important election in Virginia history. And I have to normally say, seriously, this one really is. We really do feel this way. But yes, there is some certainly fatigue. The fatigue was at its highest point, though, in January and in February. No one wanted to pick up the phone. No one wanted to talk about the Virginia 2025 races. But now, as we get closer, we're almost in that 60-day window now. I think people are starting to engage. People will begin the voting process on Friday, May 2nd. And so
coming up,
the first votes will be cast in roughly, 2 weeks from this recording.
Yeah, that's wild. It does kind of creep up on you. I'll admit it, but I do find that I'm not sure. I feel I'm starting to feel it. I'm starting to feel the fervor a little bit more. I'm starting to see, more and more campaign-related activity.
Well, the one thing, Catie, is that this primary will feature nobody at the top of the ticket sort of driving the turnout, right? Normally, you have a primary for all 3 of the statewide offices: governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. This one will not have a primary for governor because Abigail Spanberger is our presumptive nominee. She is the nominee. She won that essentially by acclamation. No one challenged her when I stepped aside. And so now it's the lieutenant governor races at the top of the ticket. And so in the past, I think 2013, we saw a similar race where Governor McAuliffe was unchallenged. And we had Ralph Northam versus Anish Chopra and Justin Fairfax versus Mark Herring. And that was 150,000 people may have shown up that time.
Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
I mean, people need to participate more. Right?
We are, yeah.
I mean, it's just a fact.
That's exactly right. And these races are important, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these are really, the closer you get to your local level, the more important I think the race is. People assume, though, that the top of the ticket is, or your federal races are the most important races that you have to participate in. The most important races, I think, are your local offices and then your state offices, because they have more impact on your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Obviously, we want you to participate in the presidential elections, but you can't wait around 4 years and sit on your hands and watch from the sidelines.
Right.
You got to be engaged. This is politics, government is not a spectator sport. You can't sit on the sidelines and think you're going to win the game. You have to be in the arena. How that looks different for every person. For me, it's, suiting up and running for office.
Yeah, and you're, unlike Abigail Spanberger, you are in a kind of a crowded field. You've got several opponents. How are you feeling? What's your confidence?
I feel great. I feel good. I think that you saw the fundraising reports. We put our internal polling out there. I know one of my opponents had their internal polling out there as well, both essentially showing the same thing, that we do have a small advantage at this. But, when a race is a multi-candidate race like this, you take every advantage you can get. And so for me, this is about building a broad-based coalition that involves different demographics and different geographical locations where we can pull votes out of and create this broad-based and deep coalition, not only to win in June, but also to win in November and govern after that.
Talk to me about the shift from governor to lieutenant governor. How did you make that decision?
Well, my daughter, Sunday, was born on March 1st of 2024. And when she was born, I took the parental leave that we usually provide for every city employee. What I did during my time as mayor, we provided 8 weeks of parental leave. I told Brandy that I would take 4 weeks. And so during those 4 weeks, not only I got a chance to know my daughter, got a chance to spend some time with my wife and talking about our future, because no one does this alone. I'm doing this with my wife, Brandy. And we talked about the race, because I was still in the race for governor. And we decided collectively that the best course for us was to pivot to the lieutenant governor's race. Also, as I've had 20 years in Democratic politics in Virginia, I have seen what happens when we have a contentious Democratic primary. We normally, unfortunately, lose out on that election in November. I wanted to avoid that. And also, I've stated before publicly, and I'll state again here, Abigail Spanberger is a very formidable candidate, and she's going to make for a great a great governor. And so it's my belief that she's going to be the next governor. And I'm looking forward to getting her elected. Here's the thing: we don't win when we're,
eating each other.
Yeah, it's just a difficult. Yeah. I've seen it happen. I saw what happened in the 2021 efforts. I saw what happened in 2009 as well with Cree Deeds and Brian Moran and Terry McAuliffe then. And I don't want history to repeat itself. We have a great opportunity before us. I'm a team player. I've talked to a number of activists, a number of leaders across the state about my decision as well.
Did you talk to her about it?
I did talk. I called the congresswoman up and told her what I was thinking, and she said, "I'm going to let you make that decision." But I told her a heads up, like, "Hey, I'm having these conversations with Brandy. I wanted you to know about that, and give me some time to further think it through." This is while I was still on parental leave for the most part. And then, we came up with, I called her when I finally made my decision and told her that, I'll be sending out a press release, and we went from there.
How did she react?
As I said, she said this was my decision to make.
Right.
She wasn't going to push me out of the race or anything of the sort. We just talked about, the fact that we needed to win. Abigail Spanberger is a strong Democrat, and we both had the similar goals in mind, right? And that was to win. And to me, I think that goal by itself is paramount to all the things that, all your future plans may be, is that the Democrats need to win this governorship back. And I'm willing to be a team player. I was at an event one time, and a person that I, is a friend of mine who's known me in Democratic politics since I was a young staffer pulled me to the side. This was in Lynchburg. And he said, "Levar, you're making it very difficult for me to choose between you and Abigail. I really want you to consider this." And I had heard this from others, over, 3 months being in the race or so. And I kind of just like, that's not what I want to do. That's what I want to do. But what I got an opportunity to do in March during parental leave was think about it a little bit more, think more deeply about it. Because normally you're just running and running. You're like, I'm
you're
in
on
this.
The treadmill.
I'm committed.
Even,
right, yes.
Right.
But I got to think about it a little more.
And let's face it, you're young. I mean, you are.
People tell me this.
Yeah.
Don't feel it like that every day.
You're the youngest mayor in Richmond's history, right?
I was.
So, like, yeah.
I'm 44 today. And that fella I was telling you about basically said that you're young.
Yeah.
There's no need for you to be in any rush. And what I believe is correct is there is no need to be in any rush. At the end of the day, if the Democrats were to win the governorship, the lieutenant governorship, and the attorney general, there is a good possibility that we can hold this office for the next 12 years. That should be the goal.
You think Virginia is still more blue than red? I mean, there's some people that make the argument that it's purple, but I'd love to know what you think.
Here's the thing. I think some people don't recognize that when it's a presidential election year, a federal year, we do have the advantage as a party. When it's an off year, it becomes more purple.
Interesting
right?
point.
Because a number of federal voters, it's about turnout. A number of federal voters don't show up because they don't think they need to participate in these off-year, non-federal elections. And the truth of the matter is, they do. And if they were to participate in the off year, then this would certainly be a light blue state.
Yeah, that's interesting because obviously the last go around, Republicans were successful, and I think, a lot of that is just mobilization in these off years. Like it's, I think there's more registered Democrats in Virginia than Republicans. Is that fair?
Well, you don't register by party here,
right?
So we really don't know.
I guess when you vote, I don't know.
Yeah, so when you vote in a primary. That's when we know it's a good possibility that this person who's voted in the last 5 primaries might be a Democrat or might be a Republican.
Right.
That's normally the tell that we pick up on.
Yeah.
But no, we don't register by party here. So in for instance, Maryland, they register by party.
Right.
I run into Virginians all the time who say I'm a registered Democrat. I said, maybe when you were in New York, maybe when you were in New Jersey, because as you know, more non-natives live here than natives do these days. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, obviously being mayor of Richmond gave you a certain experience that I'm sure is helpful in all of this. And, Richmond is a complicated city with lots of deep-rooted problems that have gone many unaddressed for decades and decades. And so, mayors walk into and inherit problems, as our current mayor has. I had him on the program, and we talked all about his handling of the water crisis and, sort of 5 days into the job. I mean, can you imagine that scenario? I was like, I don't think anyone could have a worse start, in terms, not that it was his fault or that he brought it on himself, but I'm just saying you walk into this job and there is a massive snowstorm that is already going to be like a crisis. And then it shuts down the water plant and then the city is without water for a week. I mean, when you were watching that because you live here, so you had no water.
I had no water. I mean,
it's not like
my wife got.
It's not like you can run down there and be like, "Do it this way." I mean, you can't do that. But you're probably sitting at home thinking to yourself, "Oh my gosh, this is so stressful."
Yeah, Brandy texted me and said that I'm hearing rumors. I followed up on the rumors, and people were like, "Oh, everything's okay." Well, everything was not okay.
Yeah.
And my wife wanted me to get ahead of the potential for us not having water and go get some water. I'm like, oh, everything's fine. And then the boil water alert comes and she's like, I told you. I was like, oh.
Yeah, and with a 1-year-old at home.
Yes, exactly right.
Because you've got bottles.
And a snowy day.
Right, yeah.
Right? And so I said, let me do this event and then let me go get some water after that, right? So I had to appear at an event. And once I appeared at the event, I'm getting the there's no water. The water's not even coming on
All
right now.
hell has broken loose.
And so I ordered some water, via DoorDash or something like that.
Right.
And the guy gets into a car accident on the way to drop off the water. And he was like, hey, man, I won't be able to get your water. And I was like, I need a solution soon. And so my friend who lives in Churchill, was able to give us a little water to get us through the night.
I mean, the irony of this, right?
Yes.
And
then the morning I got more water delivered, and we got through the week. But back to your question, so what people don't realize is that 8 years earlier, in my first week as mayor, that weekend, I also had a snowstorm. Roughly like 7 days into and so I was like, is this repeating itself? A snowstorm the first weekend or the first 7 days while in office.
Yeah.
And so my first 7 days in office, that weekend, I came in like on a Monday or Tuesday. The weekend we had a snowstorm.
Yeah. I hate to tell you, Levar, yours was not memorable.
No, it was not.
Compared to this one.
No, it was not.
This was bad. This was really bad. Is there any part of you that was watching that thinking, man, I should have, or man, I wish I'd, or anything that you thought as you were watching this unfold and all the facts come to light, any regrets or anything in you that was saying, gosh, I maybe should have done something different?
My wife, as the snowstorm was approaching, what people may not know that I'm a meteorology nerd, so I follow forecasts and all that stuff. And when I first had a hint that a snowstorm was coming, I'd been following it for a week. And I told my wife, like, this is a big snowstorm coming. And every night I'm looking at YouTube meteorologists and looking at your forecast at CBS 6 and other places. And my wife's like, you are preparing for this as if you're going to be here to do anything to do anything about it. And I was like, that's a good point. Yeah. I get it. This has been my routine for 8 years. And then when the crisis ensued, I watched intently because the part of like the human condition that is the hardest to accept is that you cannot help the situation at this moment. Right. At that time, I was like, I wanted to go in there and I'm thinking I'm going to go to the water plant down there. I'm thinking I'm going to go and do the press conference, but
you can't.
No, I can't.
Is there anything you could have done prior? Is there anything you could have done while mayor?
Well, I look back at what we did while we were there. We had $56 million spent on the water plant through investment in the capital improvement plan. I think $13 million in the 25 to 29 capital improvement plan budget for maintenance needs. So I thought, from what I heard from those who were working at the water plant or working at the Department of Public Utilities, these are the investments needed to maintain the water plant. However, as we all know, that the lack of investment, the deferred maintenance is as American as apple pie. And when you're talking about a 100-year facility, no one locality can fund the maintenance and the upkeep all by itself. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm running for lieutenant governor. It's because as a local elected official, as the former mayor of Richmond, I understand and recognize the policy gaps between the Commonwealth and the city, but also the funding gaps between the Commonwealth and the city as well. No locality, whether it's Richmond, whether it's Highland County, whether it's, Fairfax, can handle these situations by oneself. And so it's my hope as the next lieutenant governor that we can direct more dollars to critical infrastructure like this. Whether it's, the upkeep of your schools or your roads and bridges or even a water treatment plant, we just don't do a good job, not just as the Commonwealth, but as the United States in terms of investing in infrastructure. I have one story for you, Catie. When I was working on the combined sewer overflow, these are things that people find that aren't sexy, I guess, because I said I need more dollars for a sewer project to a member of the General Assembly. And that member said to me, you got to give me something sexier than that. And I was like, and this was not someone a part of my delegation.
That's tricky. I don't know how you make a sewer sexy.
No.
That's a tough order.
This was not someone a part of our delegation here in Richmond.
Yeah.
But someone who was in leadership. And I was like, this is what I got. This is what my needs are.
Yeah.
But it's not a sexy sort of project until something happens. And so it's my hope that the General Assembly, the state government, responds by not just, scolding the city, but also provide assistance in terms of investment moving forward.
I think the investments and the deferred maintenance are clearly, needs that need to be addressed sooner than later. I think everybody could agree on that. I guess what I wonder is just sort of, going through this as a citizen, right? Like you explained, you were without water, you were scrambling to find water for your 1-year-old, you're sitting there and knowing what you know about the water plant. whose shoulders does this fall on, this crisis? Because I think Mayor Vula is exempt, right? He wasn't here. He didn't have anything to do with it. And I think most people that I've spoken to think he handled it well. I mean, it was a heck of a first test, to be tested that way. But actually, when I interviewed him, he said, he went through COVID in Henrico, and he said, Catie, nothing. I said, was this the hardest thing you've ever been through? And he said, no, not at all. COVID was way worse and way longer. This was a short window of time. But in any case, I just wonder from your perspective, looking back, who was responsible?
Well, I wasn't there on January 6th. And so I don't have any knowledge of what occurred on that day. Only knowledge I have is what our news media has reported, or what HNTB report has stated from the city, or the report from the county, or the report from the state as well. Many, many different reports.
Yeah.
And what it seems to me it's fair to say that the systems that are used as a backup in case of an emergency should have been tested before the storm. Now, here's the thing. I get it. We get some snowstorms that come through Richmond. Not every year we get a snowstorm. And when we do, sometimes they are the minor variety. However, and I think, you got to test the systems in case of any amount of any amount of snow you may get, even if it's 2 inches, even as 1 inch.
Right. So better prepared.
You have to test the systems. And here's the thing: you don't need standard operating procedures for that. That is typical best practices when there is a incoming inclement weather emergency. And so that should have happened. And like I said, I was not there on January 6th, so I can't speak to what happened in those hours leading up in preparation. But normally when a storm is coming, you tell all agency heads that please prepare for this storm. And that message goes down into the ranks of the city employees. And so to me, from reading these reports and from the news media reports as well, that did not happen.
What were, in your mind, I mean, I cited this as a big test for Mayor Vula. For you, what were some of the challenges that you faced as mayor that you feel like really are going to prepare you for the statewide version? Because, I mean, as you know, this campaign is different, right?
Well, I think folks sometimes forget because it does seem long ago, but I led us through the pandemic and trying to be I'm an extroverted sort of leader, all right? I like to be present to do my job as mayor. It's sort of difficult to lead as the mayor of a locality in the middle of a pandemic where everyone is isolated. And that emergency right there, that crisis I dealt with, is probably one of the most, it was the most difficult, but also it was good for me in terms of how to lead during in an emergency situation. We initially thought that we were going to be, many told me that, all right, this will be a few weeks and we'll get back to regular order.
Right.
Well, that didn't happen.
Right.
And to tell residents that they had to shelter in place until, we get a vaccine or get some sort of handle on this whole thing. And also the chaos in terms of, mixed messages coming out of the federal government. And, I was probably on the phone with Mayor Vula, who was the head of the Richmond Henrico Health District at the time, on a daily basis.
Right.
And then that sort of bled over into the BLM protests.
Right, which was another huge part of your term. I mean, that was extremely challenging, I imagine, to lead through because it's like you really can't make anyone happy.
That's exactly right.
It's sort of like you...
It's similar to
making an enemy with the police. You're making an enemy with the protesters. Like you're kind of trapped in the middle of that, and it's like you want to support both, but you can't. You're like trapped.
Kate, I remember at the time saying people like, "Well, you need to choose a team," and I was like, "Excuse me, what do you mean by that?" Well, you need to choose. Are you on the side of the police or are you on the side of the protesters? And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to choose Richmond, right? I'm going to do my job." and lead. And my job during that time was to provide order, to provide direction, and also be the authority to bring normalcy back to the city. And what you realize is when you start having to fulfill those three parts of your job, people aren't very happy about it.
Yeah, they're not fans.
Right,
yeah.
they're not fan of it. It was also the same with the pandemic, with promoting or supporting, healthy behaviors like, mask and people going out there and getting vaccines. People simply do not like being told what to do.
Right.
And so you have to be the leader who's responsible for the greater good of everyone. And so when people say, well, you're on this team or that team, I was like, I'm on Team Richmond. I'm going to do my job and lead us through this. It means I'm probably going to piss this person off and piss that person off and step on this toe and step on that toe. But at the end of the day, I look back at that.
Kind of unavoidable.
Unavoidable in the job of being mayor anyway.
Yeah.
I look back at it though, and this is what I'm appreciative of in terms of people on the street grabbing me and say, Mayor, you did as well as anybody else could have done during such a situation. And I always like to remind folks, when you take a look at what occurred here in Richmond in 2020 compared to other cities that you saw on TV during that same period of time, we fared far better than they did. And the post, the after was better as well in terms of, more and more people decided to move to Richmond, more investment arrived in Richmond. So we've recovered even better from compared to other cities as well. So,
was there anything in that period, or even otherwise in your time as mayor, that you would have wanted to do differently? I mean, is there anything that you think to yourself? I mean, I know for a fact, and personally speaking, that I always learn more when I lose than when I win, because you can really take a deep, hard look at something and say, what did I do there? Is there anything that rattles around in your brain as like man, what did I do there?
When you're the chief executive, you've got this vision and you've got this plan, and you go in with a plan and promises that you made on the campaign trail, and you're like, all right, how do I get all of these promises accomplished and you're hoping for another 4 years, so for 8 years. And you may come in with an idea, and then things like situations like a pandemic or unrest may override.
Derail your plans.
Derail, yes. And you're just like, okay.
What plans are we talking about? Casino?
No, I was talking more about like development, the Navy Hill effort. I still look at the downtown area north of Broad Street that's still fenced up, still blighted. The problems still persist. And
to yourself, what if that had?
What if?
Yeah.
Right, because it would have been in operation now. The arena would be here.
And you live here, so it's not like you're
that's right.
seeing
So
it all the time.
I drive down Lee Street regularly.
Yeah.
And I see that, and I was like, what could have been? And here's the thing: the jobs that would have been would have come along with such a project would have been also would have boosted our economy here. That's the one that I have a hard time, because that's where I thought we could have found compromise, right? And I always remind people it was mostly political than anything, where I think a majority of people wanted to see something happen. Now, how it happened is a different thing. We can work on the how, right? But getting it done was what my priority was. And that's why, we tried our best to find a consensus with the city council. Yeah. It just wasn't there. And I think it wasn't there because of politics.
Right. It does stand in the way a lot, politics.
It does. And particularly when, there's an election that's coming on the horizon,
right.
People start to maneuver. If I take this down, I might be able to wear a badge and say, hey, I did this.
Right.
And the people may reward me for that. And it didn't work out that way.
Right.
Didn't work out that way.
Well, that is a good stopping point for this segment. We will be right back. And we are back on Untold with Levar Stoney, and we are now going to journey into your past. We took a walk down your present path and your path in Richmond, but let's go like way, way back. You have an interesting childhood story that sort of has formed a lot of your grit, I'm sure. So tell us a little bit about your background.
So I was born to a couple of unwed teenagers. My mother was 16. My father was 18.
Wow.
And I always remind people that it was my grandmother who intervened in my life. She's my superhero. She's my guardian angel to this day. And she raised me. She treated me as if I was like one of her own. In 1988, my family moved to Virginia. My uncle, who still resides to this day in Newport News, told my grandmother that she should move the boys, me and my brother, down to Virginia because there'll be more opportunity for us. We were on Long Island, and let's just say it was not a situation where he saw us being successful. Mm. And my grandmother had to go to my mother and say, hey, I'd like to take the boys.
So you moved without your mom?
Yes, without just with my grandmother.
Okay.
I had been living with my grandmother for most of my life at that point. I'm 7 years old. My mother accepted. She said, okay, I'll do it. I'll let you guys do it. And my grandmother comes down first. My father comes down months later. You know, he wasn't even sold on maybe he should come down there, but once he knew his kids were not going to be in New York any longer, He thought, I'll come down as well. We moved to York County. I grew up in Yorktown, and I'll admit it was a shell shock for me because in my first year of going to school, public education, I went to an all-black, school, elementary school when I was in first grade. And then I get here, and I'm kind of dropped into a place where I'm like the only...
Opposite.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I'm the only one in my class.
Right.
And I remember at least for the first couple of months, I didn't say a word. Mm. I was essentially...
It's hard to believe.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah.
Just kidding.
I didn't say a word. Yeah, I know it's hard to believe now. Yeah. But, more and more, you become more comfortable. I was able to make a lot of friends, and the teachers were great. And then my father recognized that the school district I was in, York County, was one of the better school divisions in the Commonwealth. And at times, he wanted to move to Newport News and Hampton. And he would ask us, he would say, do y'all want to move with me to Newport News and Hampton? We are his sons. And we were like, we don't want to do that. We don't want to leave grandma either. And he recognized we were very close to our grandmother. And my grandmother was like my mother.
And all this time, your mother is still
in New
Long
York.
Island? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, we stayed. I did all my schooling in York County. I played football. I did athletics, football, basketball, track. Was student body president in high school, student body president in middle school, student body vice president in elementary school. So leadership has always been like something that I've always been attracted to. As a young man, 10 years old, I was taught how to fill out the checkbook. So what I would do is the mail would come in, I would go check the mail, Virginia Power, Virginia Natural Gas, the rent to our apartment complex. I would fill out the checks for all those. My grandma would sign it. My responsibility was to put it into the envelope and mail it off. I did that for every month up until from 10 years old to the time I left to go to college.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what happened with your dad? He's out of the picture.
My father comes down a few months after my grandmother does.
Yeah.
My father had, got in trouble when he was younger. Had a felony on his record out of New York. He had some issues getting good gainful employment. Mm-hmm. There were times when he unfortunately, he said, I'd rather get caught lying than be without being able to, put any food on the table. And so he wouldn't check the box sometimes and test it out, I guess. He worked a lot of odd end jobs, construction, landscaping. I remember my dad worked as a butcher one time and came in covered in blood. And I was like, what is he doing? Yeah. Ended up working at a couple of schools as a custodian. And, that's where, before he passed away, my dad died at 49 suddenly in 2011 of heart failure. And, he never got a chance to see me ever lift my right hand and take the oath of office. My grandmother was around when I got sworn in as Secretary of the Commonwealth, but my dad never saw me do win either, to win the mayoralty or be sworn in as secretary.
So is it fair to say that neither of your parents really had much to do with raising you? I mean, it sounds like he was present, but he wasn't actually.
No, actually, my father. So the interesting thing is my father only lived 100 yards away. So so we lived in an apartment with grandma, but dad lived only 100 yards away. So we would see dad every day. Dad would, we go over and hang out with him and all that. So he was there.
Yeah.
My mother, who I have a relationship with my mother. I text her. We talk, ever so often. She was not there. But here's the thing. I recognize when you're 16 years old.
Oh, you have a 1-year-old now. Can you imagine having a 1-year-old when you were, 17?
And you know what?
It's got to be a.
And I know it was a difficult decision for her to say, to give permission for us to go with our grandmother. When I decided to run for statewide office, my mother texted me and she said, I made the right decision. And she had never said that to me in the past. She said, I remember when they came to me and I was like, no, you're not taking my boys. And when I decided to say I was going to run for statewide office, she said, I got to say, I think I made the right decision. And she did. It was a difficult decision, but she made the right one. And me and my brother have, been able to build a life for ourselves. I chose to go into public service, and my brother is in the military, so public service as well. And so I'm very, I'm grateful for her. I'm grateful for my grandmother and her sacrifice, and I'm grateful for my father's sacrifice. Yeah. They poured a lot into us. And I told someone the other day, it's like, I never let my home life dictate what I did in the classroom or in anything external to my home life. Yeah. No one would have ever known that I was living in a place where we ran out of money at the end of the month, and we were basically living hand to mouth, and, no one would ever know because I made sure to go into those classrooms and just compete. My father said, don't go into these classrooms with a chip on your shoulder. Go in there and compete. Show them that you can compete with them. And I guess I still have a little bit of that competitive nature still in me.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right. And, but you know what? I also, that's the resilience I think that's necessary to navigate sometimes, tough roles like being mayor. You're going to get knocked down, and the real test is whether or not you get back up. And in my life, everything has not always gone the way I've wanted it to, but I've always gone back up I've always stood back up for the next fight.
So you were kind of, as you said, student government president early. I mean, early on there were signs you were going to be political, right?
My dad says that, yes.
Yes. And then you, JMU, and then basically from there you leapt in, right? You got into all kinds of campaigns and political stuff.
So the first my family to graduate from high school, and I was able to trace that back that my father never graduated, my grandmother never graduated from, my grandfather, my great grandparents never did. So I was the first in my direct line family to graduate from high school, to go to college. So in college I majored in political science and public administration. And people always say, so how did you land on? I was like, well, I did like student government in elementary school through high school, but I took the advanced placement test in high school. And I remember my teacher saying, only 2 people in the whole class, in the whole school, got a 5 on this test. And you, Mr. Stoney, you did. And I said, what? That's when I knew I needed to major in political science. Yeah. And so I did that. And once I left, I wanted to start a career in, close to politics, adjacent to politics. And so it's either go to Richmond or go to DC. And so I received a fellowship with Mark Warner's office. And funny thing is, Jeff Bourne, former delegate Jeff Bourne, was on the interview panel when I was a young kid out of JMU. And he was asking the toughest questions about why you want this role and all this stuff. And that was really started my path towards, sort of working my way up the Democratic Party. 26 years old, I ran the state Democratic Party. Yeah. Some people don't know that. People think that my career began with working with Governor McAuliffe, but no. I had worked up to, I had under Tim Kaine became the executive director of the state party. This is a multi-million-dollar apparatus. And at 26 years old, I'm the responsible party during the year that President Obama is on the ballot for president. And it was a very cool experience.
I bet that was an exciting time.
I learned management skills. I got to be in the rooms with people that I never thought I would ever be in a room with. I remember, at the time my dad was still around, I was like, Dad, I just met Barack Obama. He was like, oh my gosh, you take a picture? Like, yes, Dad, we took a picture. And when my dad passed away and I went to his apartment, he had the picture of me shaking Barack Obama's hand on his wall.
And at what point did you intersect with Terry McAuliffe? When did that meeting happen?
So
do you remember it?
I do remember it. So in 2008, I was running the state Democratic Party. In 2009, I was still running the state Democratic Party. And Terry McAuliffe says he's going to run for governor in 2009. So his people reached out to me and asked if I wanted to work on his campaign. At that time, I'd been a loyal supporter of my friend and mentor was Creed Deeds. He, I worked on his campaign for Attorney General, and so I said I'm going to stay out of it. I'm going to stay out and not accept the job. Creed wins the nomination. I go work for Creed Deeds. Creed loses the general to Bob McDonnell.
Right.
And then after that, people were like, what are you going to do next? I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And so one of my friends said, you should talk to Terry McAuliffe. And so I invite Terry McAuliffe to my birthday party. And
you'd never met him before?
I had met him before. We had talked
just
before.
Casually, but never.
Yeah, casually, yeah. But this time I'm like, I'm going to invite him to my birthday party. So I invite him to my birthday party, and he shows up.
Was it at like your house? Or
no, it was at
a bar,
Lulu's, actually.
Oh, Lulu's. In the bottom.
Lulu's, in the bottom.
Yeah.
He comes, and we have a good time, a great time, and I find the courage to be like, to the person who was working for him at the time, I was like, hey, I don't know what the governor, I don't know what Terry McAuliffe's going to do.
Yeah.
But if he's going to run for governor, I'd love to help out in some way, one way or another. I get a call from Governor McAuliffe the next day and says, like, I heard you were on the team. No interview, no nothing. I heard you were on the team. And I was like, yeah, sure. And so that point
That's
on,
where you started.
I started working for Governor McAuliffe.
And what is that relationship evolved to be? I mean, do you consider him like your biggest political mentor?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
For sure. And are you guys still really close friends?
Very close friends.
Like talk every day close friends, or like talk once in a while?
I don't have to
friends?
talk every day with him because his daughter works for my campaign. So the interesting thing is that
how old is she?
She is what, 26, I guess, or something like that, 25. Yeah. And so funny thing is, when I started working for Governor McAuliffe, his daughter was 7 or 8 years old, and now we've come full circle.
Oh my gosh,
she works for me now. Yeah. So it's a small world, and so I don't need to talk to him every day because I talk to his daughter.
Got a direct line.
Yeah, I got a direct line. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he is my. You know what? I will always remember that Governor McAuliffe, when my father passed away suddenly. Normally, he came to my father's funeral and said, if there's anything that you need, I'm a phone call away. We were concerned about whether or not we could, take care of the arrangements and whatnot, which we did, but he did not have to do any of that, right? He came, and he didn't tell me he was coming. And not only did he come, Dorothy McAuliffe, she came as well. The whole team of McAuliffe friends came, and I will always remember that. And he's like family.
What is it about him that makes him a worthy mentor, or what is it about him that, in your mind? Because it seems as though he's been a thread as your career has been on the incline. He has been sort of in there with you, pulling you along. I just wonder, what is it about his leadership style or his politics? What is it that you find most unique and inspiring that would allow him to be that for you?
I always tell folks that similarly to my parent, like my grandmother and my father, is I went to school, I learned a lot, right? But I always remind parents that it's about the reinforcement back at home. And it was when I went to school and I worked hard, and there was a standard, right? When I came home, there was also a standard that was reinforced as well. When I met Governor McAuliffe, that standard was also reinforced. And I took to that. This reminds me of something that I I knew, right? Like, this is
Fatherly, like
like
accountability.
he would say he's more of a big brother.
Yeah.
But yeah, I said, you're older than I think he might be older than my father.
Yeah.
But it was like accountability and also you can do this, right? Like, he never set the standard for me at mediocre. He always set the standard for me as, you can be excellent. You can, and that reminds me of what my father did for me as well, is setting this standard that I could do anything I put my mind to. And to be in a room with someone who I think who has been successful at a young age, to tell you, this kid born to a couple of teenagers, that you can be anything you put your mind to, I guess I ate that up like wholesale,
Still,
and it still works for
working.
And it's what that is. I think that's pretty cool to have a relationship like that with someone that he thinks that he thinks that I can do something. I've always, this has been the entirety of my whole life, is that there were people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And when I was in high school and there were folks who did things for me, and I'm always like, why are they doing this for me? Right? I remember when I was in school, and
that's a blessing to have that happen to you several times in your life.
Yeah.
If you get it once, it's lucky.
I'm always like,
what I mean?
why are they, and these people didn't look like me. I always remind folks that they didn't have to, but they saw something in me, I think, and just to have a friend, a mentor, a big brother, a father figure who was willing to do the same thing, that's pretty cool.
It must have been crushing to see him lose this last go round.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you were mayor at the time. So
I was the mayor. I was the co-chair of the campaign as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was. It hurt.
Right.
It hurt.
What did you learn from that defeat? Was there anything in that defeat
as we talked about earlier about
learning
from
the most?
Yes, learning from the. And so the interesting thing is that when I worked for Creed Eads, I learned from that statewide loss when he ran for governor in 2009, and I took that know-how into Governor McAuliffe's campaign in 2013. And I had a front row view of 2021 as well as the co-chair of the campaign. And I learned from that we have to present a galvanizing economic message for Virginians that, begins with giving them a fair shot. And I always remind people that people ask questions like, oh, how are you going to relate with folks who live in the western part of the state or on the northern neck or, in the south side? And said, well, let's begin with the things that the challenges that we share and the values that we share. And I talk about that when I'm on the trail about, you want your child to have a fair shot at success. I want my child to have a fair shot at success. So let's work together on ensuring we can make that happen, right? You have schools that are run down and decrepit and, obsolete. Well, guess what? We have schools that are run down and obsolete as well. How do we fix that for both of us? There are shared challenges that Virginians share throughout this state. And I think we need leaders who are willing to fight like hell for their fair shot. And that's exactly what I plan to do as lieutenant governor.
Yeah, I remember I covered that election, and it was, it's sort of a surprise. And I think a lot of people were, the whole Loudoun County momentum that kind of pushed over the edge, and the parental choice issue became sort of the central issue. Do you feel like in watching how that unfolded, does it make you cautious about, saying things in debates? I mean, is there any one thing that you watch in that whole scenario? Because it really was sort of like a tidal wave that started with that one issue, and then really just Loudoun is a huge population. I mean, it's just, and again, it was an off year, right? So you're banking on turnout, right? It's not a presidential.
That's correct.
Yeah. Was there a moment where you were like, we should have, or we could have? Or...
Well, when anything that you have planned, when you're planning for success and it doesn't work out and you fail, it's sometimes never just one thing.
Right. It's true.
Right?
It's true.
It's
right. It's a cascade effect.
It's right. It's a confluence of factors that are involved that unfortunately lead to you. When you talk to people who are in the NFL or NBA, they're like, we didn't lose the game because you missed that free throw. We lost the game because
we were 1 point down. And
that's right. Or turnovers or whatnot.
Close,
and I think that's what occurred in 2021, where there are a confluence of different events President Biden was underwater, his approval.
Yeah.
The Afghanistan withdrawal. Yes.
Right.
Glenn Youngkin won, a high percentage of votes in rural Virginia that we had not seen from a Republican candidate. And so cutting those margins. And this is why I always say to Democrats that we have to show up in the western part of the state, in Southwest Virginia, in the Valley. And
Are you? You going there?
yeah, I'm going there. People think that we don't know Virginia outside of Short Pump, right? They think that's as far west that we will go. And we have to prove to them that, we'll go to Charlottesville, and we'll go to Harrisonburg, and we'll go to Lexington, and we'll go all the way down to Abingdon and Bristol, and even further out to Lee County if necessary to tell folks that we are the party that will give you a fair shot. And I think when you are ignored, there's no other choices but the one that's before you. You're going to likely go with that. And so you saw that happen. Like I said, a confluence of events that led to, I think, us losing by only 1.8%, but losing overall.
Well, I do think a lot of people kind of know that your names are joined, you know what I mean, and kind of wonder what that relationship looks like. So thanks for fleshing that out for us. This is a good point to take a break. We're going to come back and talk about your future ambitions. We'll be right back. So you got the primary coming up. And assuming that you win that, and assuming that the general follows and you win that, and assuming you're a lieutenant governor, the next step, it has to be, right? It has to be for governor. That would be your next goal, right?
You never want to put the cart before the horse, right? And I could sit here and give you the political answer. But what
I'm going to be focused on the job I'm doing.
But what I'm going to really say to you is that let's first see Abigail Spanberger win and make history here in the Commonwealth. And I think she is going to need supporters in the executive branch and in the legislature to get her agenda through. And I want to be one of those folks there to help her. And I think that's the most important. If I always remind Democrats, success begets success. And when I hear out there amongst Virginians right now is that there's some despair, even though we won here in Virginia. I always remind folks, we won for Kamala Harris, and we've been winning. But there was some despair out there. And the best antidote for that despair is winning, which we will in 2025. And then number two, delivering. And so I want to help not just with the win, but also I want to help with the delivering as well. And that means standing up for workers in Virginia, and particularly standing up against Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
Well, I want to get into issues that you think are critical in facing the Commonwealth right now, but one of them right now that is also a national issue is immigration, which is getting a lot of conversation. Specifically, this week and last, deportation, which has been the court's role, the executive branch, and it called to mind a story that happened here in Richmond that I feel like a lot of people still kind of want answers about, and I don't know if you can shine light on this or not, but July 2022, you and several other city leaders basically told the Richmond area and then later the national media that a mass shooting attack was to happen at Dogwood Dell on the 4th of July, and that it had been stopped by intelligence and good investigation by the Richmond Police Department. It was later determined in a courtroom with actually my former guest, Judge David Hicks, was here. We kind of touched on this in our conversation, that there wasn't any evidence to support those charges. One of the men that were suspected has been deported since. One is still here and appealing deportation. But can you explain, in your mind, was there a disconnect here? Was there in fact a mass shooting plot?
Here's what I would say. Number one, as I've said in the past, I still credit the Richmond Police Department for doing a damn good job in terms of getting a tip that comes in and tracking that tip down. They did their job. But also, when something like this occurs, you also know that this will have to go through the legal process, through the judiciary. And that's exactly what happened. Our judicial system worked the way it's supposed to work. what I think that the failures, I think, is that more and more details occurred after we received the first initial tips or information on the at the time. And as what I've learned is that normally the situation becomes a lot clearer and more in focus over a period of time, right? Essentially, I'm saying is that the information we got early on, we should have waited a whole lot longer before any communication occurred.
I see.
That's what should have occurred, I think, over that period of time. And so that's something I learned from, Senator Kane told me one time. He said, these are fast-moving, changing events, right? And when these events, they change over time. And so, it's okay to be like, you know what? The details changed, the events changed, more information came, and it's not what we thought it was.
Is that the case with this story? It wasn't what you thought it was?
I think if you look back at it, it was not what we thought it was as the more details and more information came in.
I see.
And did the call happen? Yes, all those things happened, but was it strong enough to say that,
there was a mass shooting?
There was a mass shooting?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Okay, gotcha. Well, it's funny you should say that because I was talking to Mayor Abula about him in his initial, managing of the water crisis, and he said, I wish I hadn't initially gotten out and said, we're going to have this solved in whatever it was, 36 hours or something. He said, I learned myself not to, I should have just not set those expectations and sort of just tempered. But sometimes you feel like, you want to share the information.
That's right.
But it is
because if you don't share it quick enough, people say, well, were you hiding?
And I appreciate your transparency on that because I do think it does sort of, settle the story. I think it's, it has been rattling around in there as a question in my mind, and I think you answered it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I think, at the end of the day, we live in an environment now where people want answers quickly.
Yeah.
And I'm always reminding those who work with me as well that it's okay to just take a beat sometimes, right? Because now we live in this Twitter world where people want to break the news.
You feel that immediacy.
And there were a few occasions during my 8 years as mayor where it was like, you need a statement right now. And you're like, well, maybe can we sleep on it?
Give it a second.
Bit?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
I'm curious to know, just when you're out on the campaign trail, and now we can, get into other issues. What are you mentioned the word despair. What are people most in despair about in Virginia? Because you're sampling all kinds of people from all kinds of different economic backgrounds, different parts of the state. Is there a common despair that is most often brought to your attention?
Yes. The most common one, because I'm talking to Democrats, is the insanity that's happening in Washington, D.C., just 100 miles away. I hear
outrage and...
Oh, yeah. I mean, or just, incompetence, the lack of certainty given to whether not just federal employees, but that the federal system is going to work for those here at the local level, right? When you're cutting the Department of Education, what does that mean for kids who have different learning styles? What does that mean for kids with disabilities? What does that mean for the underserved kids? When you're cutting research dollars from NIH, and what does that mean for VCU and our research universities as well? That sort of uncertainty can rock the Virginia economy. And then you have a number of employees, about 300,000, I believe, of Virginia federal work, for federal employees connected to the federal government. And so there is a lot of uncertainty amid all this chaos that's occurring right here. And here's the thing, what I heard from people years ago is they were looking for some normalcy. And that is not what you're seeing here. Here's the thing, people recognize that, maybe government can become too bloated and you need to weed out waste, fraud, and abuse, but it's about the how. And cutting thousands of jobs just willy-nilly without any strategic plan or idea behind it can be very damaging to the Virginia economy. And so I hear a lot of that. I hear a lot about the cost of living. Whether you're in Richmond or in Northern Virginia, we have 1 million renters in the Commonwealth, and more than half of them are paying a third of their annual income on housing costs. And when you are paying a third of your annual income on a housing cost, you don't have enough money for the groceries. You don't have enough money for presents.
They're also more expensive.
Yeah. Presents and gifts, or to save for a vacation or for school or for an emergency. And so you're putting a lot of people in a bind. And so we as a Commonwealth have to find ways out of this housing crisis. You probably know of the efforts I've made here in Richmond to sort of stimulate and the construction and the preservation of more housing here. I think the Commonwealth can play an intentional role as well by incentivizing localities to adopt more pro-housing reforms and policies at the local level.
Yeah, I mean, living in Churchill, I lived in Churchill when I first moved to Richmond. This would have been 2009. And the cost of a house in Churchill these days is, I mean, if you can't I couldn't have imagined it back then that would be, you know what I mean?
And here's the thing, there are millennials like us
who... yeah, you and I are the same age.
That's right, millennials like us who, many held off on buying a home. They're like, I'm going to rent for as long as I can. And then now they've got families and are like, I would like to buy a home. Well, guess what? You're not going to purchase one in Northern Virginia. And then that means people have been voting with their feet, leaving Northern Virginia, heading to Richmond. And then that influx also brings up the values here. Essentially, we don't have enough, right? We need an abundance of housing opportunities. And right now, we don't have enough. And so, yes, stimulate demand by invest in demand, which we've done here in Richmond. I think the Commonwealth can continue to do that, but also try our best to unlock supply by moving out of some of the red tape and making it easier to build more homes, period.
I wonder, when you're out and about, I mean, you probably don't run into a ton of Republicans because most people at your event are Democrats and are supporting you.
We're in that process right now.
But if you should, or if you do you try and make a bond or make a connection? Do you try and persuade others who maybe don't see things like you to see them your way? Is there any room for that, or is it still so divisive out there? Is there any possibility that you would be able to earn a Republican's vote at any point?
Well, I always remind folks I worked as Secretary of the Commonwealth under Governor McAuliffe in his cabinet. And there, when you're a state official, you're going to have to work with Republicans as well. And so when I tell folks I'm going to fight for their fair shot, no matter the color of their skin, who they pray to, who they love, how much money they may have, who you even vote for, I'm also going to fight for you as well. So I think it shouldn't matter who we vote for. At the end of the day, we expect leaders to fight for us no matter the party we vote for, the person we vote for. And so I go back to those shared challenges and those shared values, right? I don't care where you live or who you vote for, but everybody wants their kids to be successful, right? That's just the case. And I want them to know that I'm going to fight for your kids as well, right?
And to be fair, I asked the same question to John Reed, who is on the Republican side of this primary. You guys may end up being opponents. It's possible.
Who knows?
And
competitive race over there.
Yes, that's true. And I said the same to him. I said, do you have any friends who are Democrats? Like, do you have anybody that you could just lean in and get a different perspective? And he said yes, and I imagine you'd say the same.
Yeah, I don't like to do the whole I got some Republican friends as well.
I got
three friends. But I went to James Madison University. I grew up in York County. I've been in politics for 20 years in Virginia, 10 years in public service.
Yeah.
Yes, I have friends who have voted for Republicans or
voted for you.
Or voted for me as well.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I've run as an independent here in Richmond for 8 years, right, for the 2 times I ran. So, I did have people who voted for me who may have been Republicans because here in Richmond, you really only have choices of people who are all Democrats, right? And guess what? Republicans have to vote as well for mayor.
Right.
And so I go back to speaking to those shared challenges, right? And you want to see a fix, guess what? I want to see a fix as well. What changes is the how. Right? How are you going to do that? Well,
how are you going to get there?
They have a different roadmap to the how through the how than I do, right? And at the end of the day, We want Virginia. I want Virginia to be successful. If you are a Republican, you also want Virginia to be successful, then let's have a conversation.
I suppose that's the optimist in me that keeps hoping that like there's going to be these, and I'm glad to hear it.
And here's the thing, I'm glad you are optimistic because there are a lot of people who are more pessimistic right now.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be in this arena, if you're going to be engaged, you have to be optimistic.
That's part of why I'm doing this podcast, to be honest, is that like, I think you can have conversations with and be fair and be open and really talk about things with everybody. I don't know why it becomes that you have to choose a side. And there's a million podcasts that choose a side, and I did not want this to be one of them. I wanted this to be a space to really get to know people.
I remind people that I have people in my family who don't agree with me 100%.
I have those too.
Sometimes my wife doesn't agree with me. I got brothers and cousins who might be further to the left or further to the right. I love them just the same, and we can still sit down and break bread together. And so, you're not going to always disagree. And I think at the end of the day, that's okay. Mm-hmm. This is a beautiful country because we can disagree. Right? And I think we should remember that sometimes when we may not be able to find a resolution. But at the end of the day, we should seek a resolution. We should seek the fix. And unfortunately, I think sometimes people just go off in their corners and say, in order for me to win, you have to lose.
Right.
I don't like to practice that type of style of politics.
Well, I wish you good trafficless days on 95.
Pray for me.
I mean, I
Pray
will.
for me.
I had it this weekend coming back from a tulip festival with my family, and I swear
And as it gets warmer and warmer.
Oh, it was
more cars on 95.
It was something else. And I wish the best for your 1-year-old.
Thank you.
I hope she gets her walking steps soon.
Thank you.
And
don't rush it.
Yeah. Well, you'll be chasing after her. Yeah. So don't rush it because it takes a lot more work. But thank you so much for being here,
Thank you for the opportunity.
Levar, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Untold. We'll see you next time. Untold is a production of WTVR CBS 6, executive produced by Mike Bergazzi and Catie Beck, directed by Nick Maharaj and Brock Taylor, and edited by Curtis Akers. Follow the show on Instagram at Untold_WTVR.
I'm Rich Marr, host of the VPM podcast, RVA's Got Issues.
Power grid outages.
There was that water crisis that happened.
More housing.
At least you should get paid $15 an hour, at least.
Download it wherever you get your podcasts.